All right, I'm going to do a husbandry and hopefully a feeding video for one of my Hapalopus species, Colombia large. I got 3 of these guys about 14, 15 months ago from a dealer who's no longer in business, but I got them for a really cheap price. They were like 25 bucks when everybody was charging 60 or 70 for them. Actually, it might have been closer to 2 years ago. At the time, I housed them in vials. I was keeping my slings in vials. I don't do that so much anymore because I think they're a little stuffy and hard to manage. But I put in about 2.5 inches of substrate. All 3 of them dug little burrows, very like basically went right to the bottom and webbed up the top, and they would poke out whenever I jostled their containers. Most species will bolt into their enclosures. These guys would actually pop out and look for food, which was neat. At the time, I gave them crickets that I pre-killed because they were too small to eat. Even the smallest crickets I was able to find, so they would scavenge feed, but they would grab the whole body of the cricket, which was sometimes longer than them, and drag it right down the burrow and feast on it for hours. It was really neat to watch. They were little escape artists, I will say earlier on. I'm going to go down here so you can see a little better. Earlier on, they would try to bolt out of their enclosures more than I think any species I keep. Most of them will go down into their burrows, but because these guys would pop out, they would sometimes try to get out, so that's something to keep in mind. I did have an issue where, not an issue, but something that I was kind of surprised at, where 3 of them buried themselves during pre-molt, and I didn't see them for quite some time. And I was actually convinced, because they were so tiny you couldn't see them, that they were dead. And I almost succumbed and dug them out. I was glad I didn't, because eventually they all reemerged nice and hungry and quite a bit bigger. Speaking of size, these guys tend to pick up size very quickly. So this would be one that I would say if you buy as a sling, I wouldn't worry about getting a large sling or the fact that it's going to start very, very tiny, because it will pick up size very quickly. They're quite hardy. I do keep them on moist substrate. This one needs to be moistened down a little bit. My substrate is a combination of peat, topsoil, and with these guys a little vermiculite to hold some moisture in. With this enclosure, because they web so much, what I will likely do is pour the water down the side here and let it kind of filter through down to the bottom to keep the lower levels moist, which will raise the humidity a bit. If I try to spray down the top or make it rain, basically it's just going to puddle because this web is waterproof and will gather up the water. They do always have water dishes with fresh water in it. I do put sphagnum moss in, and once upon a time I was able to kind of wet that down, but now it's so covered with web it wouldn't work. They're great eaters. They go at things. I'm kind of hoping this cricket moves sometime before this video ends so you can see it grab one. Maybe I'll try to poke the cricket. And of course, the stupid thing isn't moving. They go at food with ferocity that honestly rivals my Phormictopus species and my Panthomedia species, or some of my biggest eaters and most aggressive eaters. They're really fun to watch, and they will take crickets down. I dropped just a little one in this time, but they will take crickets down that are their size, which is really neat to see. Little factoid, as slings, even as tiny slings, they sport their adult coloration, which is great because a lot of species you see the adults and you get the sling and there's these drab little brown things, or they just don't look like they're going to when they grow up. These ones look exactly like this, as little 1/4-inch slings, which were kind of beautiful. I've heard people comment that they look like house spiders, and they do kind of from a distance, but if you zoom in on them, you can see that there are hairs all over them, like a typical tarantula. Just such a unique looking spider. So again, this is the Hapalopus species, Colombia large. I've heard somebody ask online if these are a good beginner species. I do think that they're hardy, which is a good trait to have for a beginner tarantula. They can be very, very skittish, though. Mine are not aggressive or defensive per se, but they could be a handful for somebody who's not used to quicker spiders. I mean, these guys can really truck when they want to. So just something to think about. I would not encourage somebody just getting into the hobby to get one of these. If somebody's kept some of the normal beginner species and then maybe a couple of the quicker South American terrestrials or something like that, yeah, then go for it. The other thing is you do want to keep them kind of moist. So that's something that many keepers aren't used to doing and kind of panic about, and you don't want to keep them too moist or too stagnant. I think probably I've mentioned this in some of my other videos, but a lot of the tarantulas that end up dying, it isn't because they were kept dry, it's because they were too moist and the conditions in the environment became too much for them. It basically becomes like a petri dish for bacteria and stuff. So just something to think about. If you've got some experience under your belt with the faster ones, I think they'd be a good one. Here he is. I'm going to go try to poke this thing one more time and have it not get the paintbrush. And there it goes as I jump. Yay! This is literally my 3rd attempt at doing one of these videos with this species, so I'm so glad it finally did something. Thank gosh. I'm starting to feel like I'm making the most boring videos on the net because I don't poke and prod these guys. So there's the Hapalopus species Colombia large. Again, great little species, wonderful little tarantula, and I think a great addition to anybody's collection.